everybody. Thank you very much, James, for that very kind introduction. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. I'm going to do a few slides today just to outline context of the discussion that will follow in a few minutes. Okay, so I'll just click this little button and we're off. There we go. What I'm going to cover is the basis of a report we did for the Department of Infrastructure. This is the structure of the discussion I'll do today, which is scope of the work we were asked to do, the options that we defined and discussed with our client, and also the key objectives of the piece of work. That was really important because when we later looked at options, that was then criteria in effect that we're able to make a judgment in relation to the options. There were some considerations that we needed to bring to bear to the analysis, and then I'm going to look at the options in a little bit of detail, and then the financial characteristics of those. And finally, just to talk you through the appraisal that we undertook and where we landed up in terms of proposals for next steps. James kindly introduced Andy and myself. We work for a consultancy called DTP. We provide advice predominantly to housing providers, but also local authorities, charities, and to some extent in education. We cover a wide range of advice, from financial advice, funding advice, raising finance, and strategic advice to organisations. We also do reviews into operational activities as well. We've worked for the Isle of Man government for a number of years. We did a major study 10 years ago, and we produced 5 formal reports into housing need and also housing provision and related matters. More recently, we've actually advised and helped the DOI to actually model deficiency payments to the local authorities for their housing stock, their social housing stock. So we're very familiar with the arrangements here. I'm Managing Director of DTP. I've been Managing Director for 6 years. I've been with the company since 2010. Andy, my colleague here, is one of the most experienced long-term financial business planners in the housing sector. He's been a consultant for many years, working previously for Deloitte & Touche and PricewaterhouseCoopers before joining DTP as a very trusted and respected advisor. Scope of the work we discussed with our client was really to investigate the preliminary stages of establishing a housing association for the government's housing stock. So the Department of Infrastructure commissioned us to explore options and to come up with a preferred option to potentially adopt. So we identified the options and we produced a report in July for discussion and consultation within government ahead of today, really. The options that we defined were these 5 here. So we've got the first one there, which is housing association established for the DOI stock only as a standalone business. The second option is to extend that, if you like, to other local authorities potentially to join, again, as a standalone business. The third one was to consider the DOI stock, but going into an existing housing association based in the UK, undefined in this report. And then the fourth one is an extension of that. So again, with a parent from the UK, an existing parent from the UK, but with the DOI stock plus potentially other local authority stock. And then the final one was generated really from one of our original reports in 10 years ago, which was to actually imagine a position where the existing local authority stock, including the DOI stock, collaborated more effectively and procured work and services as a more coherent body. So those are the 5 options. We thought it was really important to be clear about the objectives of this analysis. So we agreed with the Minister for Infrastructure at the time of the commission a number of key objectives which are set out here. The first one, which is quite a broad, overarching one, is to enhance and expand housing services to assist in the delivery of a number of areas, including provision of housing for care leavers, homelessness, housing support for vulnerable elderly housing need. The second one was to deliver and maintain a sustainable financial business plan. The third one was to identify and secure economies of scale. Moving forward, provide value for money in terms of the use of public funds, potentially enabling grant funding to be established where public fund savings could be made, to deliver common standards as far as possible in relation to property services and maintenance of existing and new homes, to operate effectively on the Isle of Man within its laws, standards and its regulatory framework if and when that is established, enable the Isle of Man government to maintain some oversight and influence over housing and associated policy, to deliver new homes, targeting 250 units per annum as a figure over initial 5 years, and to enable the option to enable and facilitate a scalable solution that could possibly be extended. Some considerations that were important at the time were the fact that none of the options existed on the Isle of Man at this point in time. So therefore, we focused on outline assessment of options' ability to deliver the criteria. And as such, detailed legal aspects at this stage have not been explored and would need to be considered further, along with further financial modelling in due course. And obviously, wide consultation would, of course, be in order. So those are points there. So these were looking at the 5 options. Option 1, the characteristics of that would be that the Department of Infrastructure stock would be transferred into a new housing association, which would be established as an independent, not-for-profit company entity, aligned with similar practice that's been seen in Scotland, England and in Wales. It would see the assets and liabilities transferred and a transfer contract agreement, if you like, established, defining what would transfer and what would not transfer. And we cover things like housing, obviously, but also non-housing but related assets. The new organisation would be governed by a board, a skills-based board, which typically would be populated from within the community in which it served. It would take account of good governance principles and reflect the board would reflect the nature of the association's business, so the appropriate skills for the type of business and reflecting the diversity of the community. Second option, which was the extended one, where it might see the inclusion of other local authorities, again standalone, many of the same characteristics, but of course with a wider stock, wider numbers of stock. Same sort of situation in relation to a board and a transfer contract to actually define what would transfer and what would be retained by the DOI. Option 3, obviously quite a little bit different, this one. This assumes that DOI stock actually becomes a subsidiary organisation within an existing UK-based housing association parent. So that would see it transferred into a separate association, a subsidiary business, not for profit, with its own board, but that would sit within a group, if you like, that would have a parent, a UK-based parent. There would be levels of autonomy for that board within the group, but obviously applying to within what's called an intergroup agreement within that sort of housing association group. And the parent would ultimately be in control of that. The option 4 would see that the DOI stock going in with the extended, if you like, profile, which would include potentially other local authorities. So similar to the previous option, but not just DOI stock plus local authority stock. So again, similar subsidiary within a group with a UK-based parent, levels of autonomy for that board, and the parent being in control through an intergroup agreement. And the fifth one, different to the rest, because this would leave the stock as part of the where it stays now, no transfers assumed, but greater collaboration and more coherent sort of partnership work to procure services and manage the stock in a more common base, if you like, similar service standards, similar property services and property maintenance standards, and greater collaboration, basically. In terms of financial characteristics, just ask Andy to, do you want to pop up and say a few words on that?
Yeah. So in terms of the 5 options, we ran some numbers around this, or firstly on the option 1, in terms of the DOI stock, we didn't just take the actual costs that there are today, but we were looking at information that came from the wider UK housing association market in terms of average costs of management, average costs of repairs and so forth, and comparing them to what was the costs on the island. And so we made assumptions, because the costs are not the same for a housing association as they are potentially for the government to run that. We looked at that and used that as an advisory. So we were looking at that and also taking into account the Isle of Man effect in terms of some of the costs being higher on the Isle of Man than potentially in the rest of the UK. Therefore, we've made some allowances in terms of that. So we put that all together into option 1 alongside the addition of what was asked of us to put an additional 250 new units into that stock. This came with no debt, so it started afresh. It had no debt at the start of that. Obviously built up debt as it does capital works and so forth. But obviously there's more work to be done on stock condition and so forth, because we've got a report that came out from 3 years ago that we've used, but that it will need to be updated if we went through this process. On option 2, we've taken that option 1, then added other local authority stock onto there, and in a similar way made sure that it aligns with the UK-wide sort of numbers. But we've also got stock condition surveys that are a lot older for the local authority stock, but we use those, but compared them to what an average housing association in the UK of the same size would be paying in terms of capital works going forward. So we were making sure that they kept to a certain standard, but also delivering the 250 units. In terms of that option 2, there was an issue because the debt would transfer from the local authorities as well. So that could mean that there would have to be some form of arrangement in terms of how the debt transfers and what would be needed to keep a level playing field, because it wouldn't be fundable on its own in its own right. It would need some form of in such a HDP allowance, but it wouldn't be an ever-growing HDP allowance. It'd be a flat-lined HDP allowance rather than what we've got at the moment in terms of HDP. So the deficiency payments to each local authority. Option 3, as Andy said, was just taking option 1 and then overlaying it into a group structure. Now, there would be some economies of scale because back office staff could be provided in terms of some of the costs. So we assumed a small saving, but it just develops on that, you know, if option 1 works, option 3 will work, but there are other issues around that are non-financial. On option 4, similar process to option 2, similar to option 3 as well. We're overlaying a group structure, some back office savings, and still that would lower the amount of money that would go in terms of this dowry level, as we call it, in terms of the money that could go in. But obviously, it still needs a dowry of some kind. And then on option 5, this is more difficult to model because obviously this is really slightly the status quo for local authority stock at the moment, with some watering down by the DOI stock moving into those regional body areas, and also some economies of scale coming from that. So it could bring down HDP allowances, but it would not stop HDP. It would have an effect in terms of reducing HDP levels, but not to a great degree.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Andy, for that. So, as you can see, quite a lot of financial modelling undertaken in respect of each of the 5 options, which we discussed with Treasury as well, just to ensure that our assumptions were reasonable, and seemed to come to agreement that they were. So quite a bit of financial stuff there, which was useful in terms of, as Andy said, working out where a dowry, if you like, or a sum of money might be required to support some of these options, and where it wouldn't. So in option 1, there was no dowry required. In option 2, there's a dowry required. And in option 4, there's a dowry required. In each of those cases, that dowry, if you like, which would be a flat sum over a period of time, would actually be lower than the current subsidy payments that are made. So potentially good options, but all of these need to be compared against their deliverability, if you like, against the key criteria. So in terms of our analysis, we did some scoring of best fit, if you like, against the criteria. And in conclusion, we were able to form an opinion, really. We felt that option 1, which was the DOI stock as a standalone, if that was selected as a preferred option and seemed to be successful with, in consultation with stakeholders, to be able to deliver the key objectives, there would appear to be some potential for this model to be scaled up. So obviously this would be the government stock only to begin with, and with potential for others to join. So with wider consultation, that would potentially be scalable. No dowry required for that. Option 2, on current assumptions, would be viable, but with the provision of support. Lower than the projections for subsidy going forward, but some financial support. And obviously a wider sort of consultation required because it would go beyond the DOI stock. Option 3, we felt had less attraction as a viable option, provided option 1 could be progressed effectively, because option 3 would be within a UK-based parent group. So we felt if option 1 is viable, it's probably more logical to actually progress that rather than, let's say, complicate matters by involving a third party into that equation. So again, if option 1 was considered to be viable and practical without the requirement of a partner parent, then it would, in our view, make sense to select that as a preferred option when compared. Option 4, which was a UK-based parent, but with DOI stock and other local authority stock in there, required a lower dowry than the option 2, which was the DOI plus the potentially other local authorities. That assumed that economies and added value could be generated from the inclusion of a UK-based parent, which would potentially bring in economies of scale through back office sharing of costs and other procurement benefits potentially. Whilst the dowry would represent a lower contribution than current subsidy levels, we felt it could present greater challenges in terms of securing stakeholder support for that, particularly more than option 1, which is a more straightforward option, which only includes the transfer of DOI stock and no dowry. Option 3 and 4 both assume the involvement of a UK-based existing parent, which, whilst there is potential there for what you might call additionality, because traditionally a UK-based parent association does provide wider than just housing conventionally, and there is potential for the procurement savings and back office savings as well. There'd also be experience in things like regulation, obviously operating within a regulated sector. However, they would undoubtedly present challenges in terms of the capacity to build wider support for that type of proposal. And as such, it's possible that the longer term sort of benefits might be present, but the inability to make early progress is something of a barrier that we felt would sort of warrant against that, those options with the UK parent. Option 5, which was the last one on the list there, as currently defined, exhibits some weaknesses when compared to the other options, including an apparent lack of capacity to deliver new homes, which all of the previous 4 in our planning, in our financial modelling, were able to do, albeit some with subsidy in the form of a dowry, a flat dowry. There would be a continued requirement under option 5 for the housing deficiency payment subsidies, although because there are some assumptions in option 5 for procurement savings and the benefits of collaboration, as defined by the characteristics of this option, there's obviously some potential for that subsidy, housing deficiency payment subsidy, to be reduced, and we have considered that in our modelling. On the face of it, though, we felt that compared with the other options, there were some significant challenges in relation to its ability to deliver the key objectives that had been established. So we did a basic assessment of fit without applying any weighting, and in that measure, on a very loose, straightforward assessment, our view was that option 1 came out as the preferred option there. And so we made a number of proposals for next steps, or considered next steps, if you like. First one being that the adoption of option 1 as a preferred option should be considered for obviously wider consultation and further more detailed examination. This is, after all, an option study. There's further detail that can be applied to this analysis. It was proposed that the report be more widely circulated, and then following that, it would be useful to actually assess the option in a little bit more detail. That's a sort of quick run through what is effectively a very detailed report with a lot of detailed modelling as appendices.